With all that's going on in the world, I thought this would be a really good opportunity to talk about governance and the way that Decred improves on Bitcoin's form of governance by including a mechanism for dealing with contentious issues. So in today's session, we're going to look at hard forks, soft forks, and chain splits.
I don't know a lot about the Decred.
Kidding about printing, flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the bank.
I wish I was more educated on Decred. Decred. He is bullish on Decred.
So in this graphic, I have quite a lot of stuff going on, but we're just going to focus in on the chain forking area and a little bit of Bitcoin history and look at how Decred takes this forward and offers a solution to this particular problem. So just to recap, I have a very particular investment strategy. So I don't do short-term trading, and I'm not keen on speculation. So I'm really looking at a form of sound money in the crypto world. So that's really what I'm looking for, is a project that can eventually be sound money. So in order for this to come true, I have 10 points here that I try to meet for every single project. So the first point is it must have a max supply of 21 million. It must have an open ledger. I'm not interested in tokens, so I don't even look at that in this particular kind of environment, but that's not to say that tokens don't have some kind of value later on down the line, but I'm just looking at sound money. The next thing is I look at the way the projects are governed and see if they're fairly governed and see if they've got mechanisms to make for longevity, to make sure the project can last. Then I look at development and making sure that there is constant development to improve the project and that the project can be improved over time. Then I look at privacy and security, followed by coin distribution. I look at how the coins were distributed early on in the project's life. This is really important. Then I look at transactions, whether they have low fees and fast transaction times. Then coin storage, and then finally I look at tools. At the moment, in the current development of all of these projects, it's fair to say that the tools are very limited. So what I'm looking at in terms of sound money is whether a project fulfills this idea of a store of value, and then later on it can become a medium of exchange and so on. So that's the scenario that I'm looking at. So as we go forward, we're going to look at hard forks, soft forks, and chain splits. Now this is a really kind of contentious issue, because if a project can't govern itself, I really don't see that there is a huge long-term future, not in terms of fairness for anyone that wants to get involved. Now let's just cover four of the main points here. So whenever you look at a YouTube video, you go onto one of these forums and you listen to what people are talking about, it's going to be one of these 4 points. So the first point is whether a project is forked from Bitcoin. So forked projects is actually not as bad as it sounds, and people make it sound really, really bad, but in actual fact, the very nature of open source projects and open source code means that the original developer actually intended for that project to be developed by lots of different people and for it not to be barriered. So a person can fork the project and start again, and they can improve it and they can jig the code and they can pretty much do whatever they want and make it their own project. That's actually allowed under the licensing agreement. The only thing that they should do is make sure that they kind of give credit to the original developers. Now pretty much every single project in this environment is actually some kind of fork of the original Bitcoin code. Now I use these terms very carefully, the original Bitcoin code. So the way that Satoshi built it originally, it was Satoshi's code, and that's what everything kind of comes from. And once again, I wouldn't get too caught up in people saying, oh, that's forked of Bitcoin, because pretty much they all are. The next thing, which is probably the worst one actually, is soft forks. Now soft forks is actually a really big issue. And it's this idea that a fork, it's a piece of development can happen on a project, and not everyone needs to run that development in order for the whole project as a whole to run. Now in software development, if you have lots of different versions and lots of old code floating around, it doesn't take very long for a project to become slow and clumsy and quite cluttered. So in actual fact, a soft fork in the short term seems like a really good idea. In the long term, it's really not a good idea, and eventually a project will need to have a cleanup of code. So you can't keep soft forking without having to kind of bring everyone together at some point and say, right, this is version 2 or this is version 3, and now we have to hard fork and everyone has to run the same piece of code. When you look at hard forks, now when you're visiting the forums and people are talking about hard forks, they normally talk about them in this really negative way. But if you think about it, a hard fork is just an upgrade, okay? And it's an upgrade that says, you know what, if you want to run the latest, greatest, everyone has to be running the same software. So a hard fork is absolutely necessary. And you need this to make sure everyone is running the same code. You need to make sure that the code is clean, that it's fast, that it's reliable. You know, and in the current ecosystem with Bitcoin, where they're basically saying, no, we will never hard fork, everything will be done soft fork, and no one really has to run all of the code. It's just not realistic. So when the next hard fork comes, you're going to find these new chain splits, because if everyone's not running the same code, if the miners don't upgrade and the nodes don't upgrade, and everyone's not running the same latest code, that's where the chain splits. In the past, chain splits have come from contentious issues. So it could be that somebody says, hey, I want to make the transactions faster. I want to include more transactions into a block. So let's make the block size bigger, or let's produce more blocks inside of that 10-minute time. And then the decision is made, and if that decision goes through, then that's a new piece of code. That's an upgrade, and that's where the Bitcoin project is currently. They have no mechanism for this kind of hard fork to make sure everyone goes onto the same piece of code. So inevitably you get lots of chain splits. Now, chain splits are bad for lots of different reasons. Now, one of the reasons I particularly don't like chain splits is because I believe in this 21 million. And if 21 million is realized, you can't have chain splits, because the minute you have a chain split, you have double the amount of coins. Now, that's the difference between a forked project and a chain split. Is the forked project has to start from 0 coins again, so there has to be an investment. In order for the project to kind of get started, there has to be an investment of time, energy, and probably money. Whereas with a hard fork or a chain split, and you get this second coin, everyone that owns a coin gets that same coin in the new chain as well. So there's no investment. All of a sudden it's just circulated loads. And if you have multiple chains that actually continue to run, the people that had the coins actually become quite rich and quite powerful. And that's what's happening in Bitcoin. Let's just go to the chart. So if I just zoom out just a little bit, in the first 8 years of Bitcoin's life, there was a few forks, but most of them died actually, and Bitcoin was allowed to run, and there was probably some upgrades that happened that were non-contentious, and it was fine. But when it got to this kind of 2017 point, there was lots of discussion about how to take this project forward, and a lot of fair-minded people were saying, look, we need to upgrade this, things need to happen because transaction fees are getting expensive, time is slowing down, and it's getting a little bit ridiculous. And that's where the BCH fork happened. Now, Bitcoin Cash, for all its kind of what's the better word, for all the kind of issues that it may have, or for all the kind of speculation that people may think of it, actually was trying to do the right thing, was trying to bring the cost down, trying to make the software reliable again. And for a very short time, it had the backing of a lot of people, including Coinbase, including a lot of the other big exchanges, and including a lot of the miners. And then literally either on the day or on the lead up to the day of this kind of hard fork happening, all of a sudden they said, nope, we're going to stick down this route and we're going to follow this particular person because they've said this is right and all the rest of it. So a decision wasn't made. So you ended up switching on 2 different bits of software and you got the split. This benefited lots of people, especially the people that held Bitcoin, the original Bitcoin, at this point here. So all of these guys now, if they held 100,000 original Bitcoin, they now had the same 100,000, but they also now have 100,000 BCH. And at this particular point, it was worth £3,000, so they could have sold that straight away and actually double their profit. It was running like for like with Bitcoin at one point. Now, as that went forward, you then started to see lots of more projects coming on. Off of the Bitcoin Cash chain, another project happened called BSV, which is something like Satoshi's vision, where they said, no, actual fact, we need even bigger block sizes. Rather than just the 2 or the 8 meg block size, we actually want to increase it to 32. Now, there is a massive issue with that, because obviously the chain actually becomes ridiculously large and it causes all kinds of problems. But they went ahead, they did it, and now all of a sudden anyone that was holding Bitcoin Cash and the original Bitcoin now had this Satoshi Vision coin. So at its current value, the original Bitcoin is worth something like 8,000, Bitcoin Cash is worth something like £200, and Satoshi's Vision is worth something like £150. So, and they would have got the same amount in all three of these coins with no investment. And that's where the issue comes. Now, you think to yourself, well, okay, this has happened, this period of time's gone. What has Bitcoin done to solve this from happening again? And the answer from what I can see, and please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but the answer from what I can see is nothing. There is no hard mechanism to say, hey, we're not going to allow this to happen again. We're not going to overinflate this coin, so 21 million becomes 42 million and so on and so forth, and no more splits that are contentious. And we're going to find a way of making decisions, and that just haven't happened. Look, this was 2017. We're now 2020, which is here, which was 3 years later or whatever, and they haven't even implemented this. Now, this to me is really, really worrying. And as we go forward, I suspect we'll see a few more hard forks, but one thing I suspect we'll see, if we come up here, we've got in 2025, I think it is, we're going to be mining the last 1 million coins. Now, from my calculations, if the original Bitcoin chain isn't worth something like 100,000, the miners are not going to be profitable anymore. So what are the miners then going to do to become profitable? And there's a whole bunch of options. Some have thought that maybe they'll attack the chain to make money that way. Some think that they'll just hard fork and then make money that way. I actually think there'll come a conclusion where they say, actually 21 million isn't enough. We need 42 million and we can carry on our way. And that's not what we signed up for. We signed up for 21 million. So just keep this in mind. At the moment, this whole idea of 21 million has gone completely out the window, because if you follow all of these hard forks, and these are just the ones in the top 100, there's loads more that are not in the top 100 or top 200, I think this one is. But you can see now we've actually got 294 million coins, and anyone that held Bitcoin and continued to hold Bitcoin at this point owns every single one of these coins with the original amount that they had in this one without putting a cent more down. Now, I'm hearing some of you say, well, that's great, because that means if there's more hard forks, I can double my money. But it's not, because anyone that joins now missed out on all those coins, and they're actually on the back foot. They're actually buying coins that have no real value. The supply has been overextended, and another way you can think about this is money printing. Look how up in arms the Bitcoin community gets every time the Fed print millions of coins, and effectively that's what happens every time these guys can't come to a decision and there has to be another fork. So I don't see it being too much longer before, maybe 4 years down the line, before we see some more issues happening. But this is not on. So, why am I so into Decred? Now, Decred, from the word go, has built governance into its system. And remember, I'm all about this 21 million. So if Decred starts to split off and they start to get another chain and another chain, then obviously I'll be like, what the hell's happening? But because of the way their ticket system works, where the coin holders actually have as much a say in the system as the miners do, this is really unlikely. If there was a contentious issue, like say they couldn't decide on whether the block size got lifted or not, it would go to vote, and the vote would have to pass with 60%. Now, at that point, if it passed with 60%, it's going to go down that upgrade route. If it doesn't, it won't. And now, for the people that didn't get it their way, what they'll find is if they try and take the whole community, it won't go. They won't have enough to keep it going. They'd have to physically build and start again. And remember, when it comes to forked projects, I don't actually have a problem with that. If you want to fork and start again, I don't have a problem with that, because you have to make an investment. So if it's a forked or a chain split, I'm okay with the forked projects and starting again and maybe trying something new and something better. I'm not okay with overinflating the original supply. So Decred, they've actually changed loads of stuff, but let's just focus on 3 things, otherwise we could be here all day. So let's focus on the fact that they've got governance, and this was built in from day one, and this is on-chain and off-chain. So one thing that Decred realized is if they did all the voting process, which is all the comments that you would, on Bitcoin, on the Twitter feeds and all the rest of it, that's where they evaluate whether they need to upgrade or not. So that's all your off-chain processing, where Decred's got Politeia, where a proposal submitted and the whole community, the voters, they actually have a say, and they can write about why, or they can ask questions, and the people proposing the vote have to answer those questions. And then it goes to the actual vote, which eventually goes on chain and it gets registered, and then it either happens or it doesn't. And it's a really great mechanism, and once again, this was done from the start. Now, I've looked at a few different projects that are trying to implement governance halfway through, and most of them have been really unsuccessful. And this is why I like Decred so much, because they're literally the only project that thought, we better build governance in from the start. And now all these other people are saying, all these other projects are saying, hey, actually, in fact, that's a really good idea, and they're really struggling with it. It's actually not the easiest thing to implement, and there's a few contentious issues with implementing it halfway through, where people say, no, I don't want this, and they can kind of it's very hard to do. And the last thing is the treasury, to stop outsiders from getting an overinflated say. The Decred community actually funds itself, so the more valuable the coin becomes, the more will happen in the project. Now, we've just gone through kind of like these really hard times. Last 2 years for Decred have actually been quite tough, but they've actually built some amazing stuff. One of the things that I'm looking forward to the most is the DEX, the Decred exchange, which is absolutely amazing. I'll do another video on that, but that was all built by the treasury. It didn't take external capital to build that, and that's actually really, really impressive. So before we close out, let's just look at one thing. On this chart, I've got the kind of scale to what's happening so far. And remember, we had governance built in, and we're now like 4 years and 4 months old, something like that, maybe a bit older. And we're currently at £16. Now, if you look at the Bitcoin chain, by the time we got here, it was actually dollars this was. We're at $16, and the Bitcoin chain at this point actually was at $139. So it kind of tells you exactly that we're at a low price at the moment. And it's a really good entry point. And remember, we are fixed at 21 million. If this governance holds for the long term, in 5-10 years, there will be no extra supply chains going in. There will be no chain splits. So it's going to be a massive, massive thing. So just keep that in mind. Now, I hope that was useful. I'm going to go through this chart again and look at some of the other data, but I just want to try and keep the length of this video down a little bit. But if you like this content, you want to see more, give us a comment, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We are still aiming for our 100 subscribers. That will help us turn on the SEO title for our YouTube channel, which obviously can bring in more viewers and things like that. So if you think this is useful and you like what you're hearing, and you want to support that subscription is brilliant. So I'll see you
I
next
don't
time.
know a lot about the Decred.
Kidding about credit flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the bank.
I wish I was more educated on Decred. Decred is bullish on Decred.